It is almost impossible for us today to imagine what it must have been like around the streets of Whitechapel and Spitalfields in the aftermath of the Jack the Ripper atrocities. Separated as we are by the passage of more than a century, the thoroughfares of the Victorian East End are a foreign country to us, and one which we, sadly, will never have an opportunity to experience. As it happens, however, many 19th century journalists saw the opportunity afforded by the streets of East London for newsprint, and they ventured into the district at all hours of the day and night in search of copy. Consequently, although we cannot now visit those streets, we can at least do the next best thing and read the accounts left to us by those long-ago journalists and gain an impression of the streets and of the people who lived in and frequented them at the time of the Whitechapel murders. Allowing for the inevitable journalistic embellishment on the part of the authors, these articles provide us with a window through which we can look into the autumn of terror and witness the horror and the panic as the aftermath of each murder unfolded and people tried to come to terms with the diabolical events that were occurring in their midst. One journalist who wrote extensively and insightfully about the East End atrocities was George Sims, whose column Mustard and Cress appeared each Sunday in the Referee newspaper under the pseudonym Dagonet. On Sunday the 21st of October 1888, he published an article detailing his recent experiences when he had visited Whitechapel with a solid determination to catch Jack the Ripper and, as a result, make himself the hero of the hour. Over to you, George. Last Saturday night, having a holiday, I spent it in Whitechapel, in the hope that I should be able to work up a nice picturesque article entitled A Night with Jack the Ripper, and to wind up with the announcement that I had caught him and handed him over to justice. I have all along had the idea that it would be a magnificent advertisement for me to run the terror to earth. Imagine the sensation which would be created when Monday's content bills displayed in huge letters, "The Whitechapel murderer captured by Dagonet. Fearful struggle, heroic conduct of the captor, message from the Queen." I cannot tell you exactly when this idea came into my mind, but I know that when it did get there, it hung up its hat behind the door as though it meant to stay. It was ever present by day, and by night it haunted my dreams. A secret voice seemed to whisper to me, "Go to Whitechapel. Who knows but that you really may succeed in catching Jack?" The presentiment that I was to be the means of laying Jack by the heels and earning the gratitude of the police and the public grew so strong upon me that last Saturday night, having ascertained that Jack had sent a postcard to the authorities informing them that he meant to do 2 more murders, I determined to turn amateur detective and go upon the warpath. And with this explanation of how I came to spend last Saturday night in Whitechapel, I must ask the reader to accept my assurance that every word which now follows is strictly true. It is no exaggeration, no effort of the imagination. It is a solid and sober statement of facts. I left home at 9 in the evening, dressed as a ship's engineer, accompanied by Albert Edward, who was made up as a foreign sailor. It was nearly 10 when we arrived in Whitechapel, and we had no sooner turned into the murder district than we found things remarkably lively. Once or twice as we walked along, we spotted the private detectives and amateur policemen who were out on the same job as ourselves. Most of them eyed Albert Edward rather suspiciously, and I must confess they had good reason, for a more villainous-looking foreign sailor I never saw in my life. He looked capable of all the murders that have ever been committed, and a good many that haven't been thought of yet. We had not been surveying the busy scene many minutes. What a scene Whitechapel Road is on a Saturday night, before we heard a cry, and instantly there was a rush towards a gateway. It was only 2 ladies quarrelling, but as we hurried up, a small boy saluted us with a grin and exclaimed, "Hee-haw, governor, this way to the murder, triple murder up this court." There was a roar of laughter, and the true state of the case being ascertained, the crowd dispersed. The borderline between the horrible and the grotesque has grown very fine in Whitechapel of late. There has probably been a revulsion of feeling, and the inhabitants have relieved their overstrained nerves by laughing. Certainly, last Saturday night, although another murder was confidently expected, the general body of sightseers and pedestrians were making light of the matter. Along the pavement, which for many a mile is hedged with shooting galleries and various arrangements based upon the 6 throws a penny principle, plenty of hoarse-voiced ruffians were selling a penny puzzle, in which the puzzle was to find Jack the Ripper. Jack was upon every tongue, male and female, last Saturday night. The costermonger hawking his goods dragged him in. The quack doctor assured the crowd that this marvellous medicine would cure even Jack of his evil propensities, and at the penny shows, outside which the most ghastly pictures of the 7 victims, all gashes and crimson drops, were exhibited, the proprietors made many a facetious reference to the local terror. As soon as the humours of Whitechapel had begun to pall, we left the main thoroughfare and plunged into the back streets and labyrinthine network of courts and alleys. We visited the spots where the murders were committed, and about midnight we had Buck's Row entirely to ourselves. How on earth a murder was committed here without attracting the slightest attention is a great mystery. The houses are so close to the spot, there are so many chances against a secret crime being committed. The place was such an unlikely one for a deliberate assassin to select. Albert Edward and I tried to work the murder out and get a theory, but we failed utterly. We, however, attracted attention. When we next visited Buck's Row, there was not a soul in sight. We had not stopped by the gate where the murder was committed 2 seconds before a dozen people were about us, as if by magic. 2 policemen came up, goodness knows where from, and flashed their lanterns on us, and to the rest of the company, who were evidently amateur watchmen, eyed us suspiciously. A few words to the constables satisfied them as to the nature of our business, and we were allowed to pass. But everywhere we went that night in the hope of dropping on Jack the Ripper, we found that the police were on the alert, and that plenty of amateur detectives were hiding round the corners. From personal observation, I should say that there was not a corner of Whitechapel, no matter how obscure, that was left unwatched last Saturday night. All night long the police were about, and we saw them come again and again, and enter dark passages, and turn their bull's eyes onto dark corners. If Jack had tried another experiment last Saturday, it would have been almost impossible for him to get away. Probably he knew it. At any rate, he didn't come near enough for any of us to put the salt upon his tail with which we were provided. Soon after midnight, the principal thoroughfares in Whitechapel began to clear rapidly. The stalls packed up, the shops closed, and the people went to their homes. The ladies, I noticed, who were out late, walked in 2s and 3s. At midnight we were outside a public house not far from Mitre Square, and we noticed the women as they came out, got together and walked towards home in company. One lady's pal lingered behind to talk to another lady. Her lady friend who was waiting called out, "Come on, Sylvia, I'm frightened, let's get home." Sylvia replied, "All right, Liz, I'll see as Jack don't have ya." And then Sylvia came along, and with a passing compliment to Albert Edward, joined her friend and went off. She was not at all the sort of lady whose name you would guess to be Sylvia. We stayed in Whitechapel till 3 in the morning. We crept into backyards, and we hid ourselves down side streets. We adventured ourselves into some of the most lonely and desolate-looking spots it has ever been my lot to witness, but we never remained long in undisputed possession. A policeman was on to us directly. I can bear personal testimony to the marvellous vigilance exercised by Sir Charles Warren's merry men on that Saturday night at least. At 3 o'clock in the morning we agreed that there was no chance of getting Jack that night, and after a little friendly converse with a policeman or 2, we turned our weary steps towards home. I must confess that I was disappointed. I had quite made up my mind that Albert Edward and myself were to be heroes by Sunday morning. I had arranged it all. The moment we saw Jack, Albert Edward was to spring on him and hold him while I went for a policeman. I had my notebook and freshly sharpened lead pencil all ready to do a special there and then for Sunday's referee. And instead of waking up the following morning a hero, I woke up with a dreadful headache and a fixed determination not to play at being an amateur detective again. There are too many of them about just now for the game to pay.